One of the biggest mistakes that I can remember making as a college student was spending all the money that I was supposed to use for a bus ticket back home on various other things throughout the semester. That was because when the time came for me to go home, I didn't have any way to afford the bus ticket. I couldn't ask my parents to send me the money either because this was back in 2004 when there was no Venmo or other cash transfer apps. At the time, it felt like my only option was to attempt to hitchhike home and hope that someone took pity on me as I carried my bags. To my surprise, I only had to walk about 3 miles before I was able to successfully flag someone down. A green Subaru Outback pulled up on the side of the road just ahead of me, so I quickly made my way over to the passenger window and leaned down to introduce myself. The driver appeared to be by himself, and he even looked like he was relatively close to my age. I explained my situation to him and asked if there was any chance that he was passing through or near Poughkeepsie because I live just outside the city. And thankfully the man, who introduced himself as Adam, was happy to help. I loaded my bags into the backseat of his car before hopping into the passenger seat and taking off. The two of us made small talk, and according to Adam, he had just graduated from the same school I had been attending, so we bonded a bit over that. But at the end of the day, he was still a stranger. I didn't really know anything about him, so I kept my guard up for the entirety of the drive, which was supposed to be around 2 hours. Things changed a bit though when we were about 45 minutes from Poughkeepsie and Adam asked me for my address. Now my mind was telling me that he probably just wanted it to put it in the GPS to find the fastest route to my house, but my gut was telling me to be wary. I tried to explain to Adam that he could just drop me off at one of the Wendy's in the city and I would have my family pick me up from there after using their phone. I honestly didn't expect him to get upset, but for some reason, Adam began to raise his voice and asked me why I didn't want him to drop me off at my house. I didn't know what to say to him because I didn't want to upset him any more than I already unintentionally had done. But when I went to answer him, I noticed that he'd begun pulling over to the side of the road. I asked him if he wanted me to get out of the car because I kind of wanted to do that anyway. I was very uncomfortable. He told me that he didn't want that to happen, and he just wanted me to explain why I didn't trust him. Again, this was really odd seeing how I just met him, so I didn't quite know what to say. That was when his face began to get red, and I could see the anger in his eyes. I reached for the door handle, but he reacted by quickly locking the doors. Thankfully, the car had locks that I could pull upward to unlock, so I ripped the lock up and threw the door open before running out of the car. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew that I had to get out of there, so I ran from the side of the road and into the woods, leaving my belongings in Adam's car. I heard him yelling behind me. He was screaming that he was going to find me, but after that, I didn't see any sign of him. I hid in the woods for an hour, and by that time, it had begun to get dark. I had to figure out how to get home, and I figured my best bet might be to head back to the road. And thankfully, by the time I got there, Adam's car was gone. I started walking down the road, and after a while, I saw a gas station that allowed me to use its phone. I called the police as well as my parents, who ended up asking my neighbor to borrow their car and come pick me up. The police didn't know what to make of the situation aside from the fact that I was now missing most of my belongings. But all they could say was, that's the danger of hitchhiking. Growing up, you're always told that you shouldn't pick up strangers off the side of the road, and I used to always think that was a jaded way to look at the world. Too bad I had to learn the hard way that sometimes it's alright to be a little jaded. You see, it was about 4 years ago. I was hanging out at the mall with my friend Kieran, and I was the one who had driven us there. It was probably around 4 in the afternoon when we decided to head back to his house to hang out for a few hours. At least, that was the plan. On our way home, as we were driving along the highway, I noticed that someone was walking alongside of it, and it looked like they were only wearing a t-shirt, and it was in the middle of January, so it was really cold. I felt bad for the guy and asked Kieran if he was alright with me stopping and seeing if the guy needed help, and he was fine with it. I pulled off to the side of the road and waited for the guy to walk up to the window, and right away I could tell that he was freezing. I asked him if he needed a ride into town, and he was very grateful about it. He quickly hopped into the back seat and explained that he was homeless and just looking for a ride to his friend's house. We began heading down the road, and the man just continued to thank us. It was really cool at first. That was until we had to stop for gas. I let him know that I needed to fill the tank real quick, and again he started thanking us for picking him up and said he was glad to have friends again. I thought that was odd, but hey, if he needed a friend, I would have been there. But things got weird. When I asked him if he wanted anything from the gas station and he said no, but then made a really odd joke. He said something along the lines of, "I can't offer you any money, but I can rob this place for you." Kieran and I looked at each other and sort of forced out a chuckle and then tried to brush the comment off. I got gas and sodas for all of us and then hit the road again. I asked the man where he needed us to drop him off, and I don't know exactly what set him off, but he began screaming at us. He began saying that he thought we liked him and that he was just joking about robbing the store, which once again took us off guard because I genuinely didn't mean anything. I tried to explain that he needed to be dropped off at his friend's place, and I just wanted to know where to take him. The man started punching the back seat next to him and then said something along the lines of, "I can't believe you're kicking me out." Kieran and I were really on edge at that point, and that was when Kieran told me to pull over. He then looked back at the man and asked him very kindly to get out of the car, and before either of us could react, the man swung a box cutter at Kieran's face. Kieran pulled his face back, and I could see that he had gotten sliced across the nose and right under his eye. I screamed for Kieran to run as I pulled the keys out of the car's ignition. We both ran out of the car as fast as we could and began running down the road. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and I began dialing 911. I looked over to see Kieran clutching his face as blood poured down it. I spoke to the dispatcher about what had happened, and they sent an officer to meet us down the road from my car, as well as an ambulance for Kieran. By the time the officer took me back to my car, the man was already gone and the entire interior of my car was cut up and destroyed. My glove box was empty, including all of the paperwork for the vehicle and insurance. I ended up getting my car towed and had to pay almost $3,000 to have everything all fixed up inside, and Kieran ended up needing to get 13 stitches in his face. I hate being this way, but I will never pick up another hitchhiker in my life. I have learned my lesson. If there's one thing that I learned by being in a relationship is that you should never argue. But if you're going to have a dispute, you definitely should wait until you are home and not in the car. But you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20. I was 19 years old and I was driving home from a concert that was about 3 hours from my house. On the way home, my girlfriend was driving and I forgot what happened, but we got into an argument over something trivial. And after about 5 minutes of bickering, she did something that to this day I don't blame her for. I was acting like a jerk, so she kicked me out of the car and told me to call someone to pick me up. I didn't argue and ended up getting out of the car, and without me even being able to say anything, she took off. I grabbed my phone out to call a taxi, but it was just my luck that the battery had died at the show. My only option at that point was to start walking and hope that I could find a ride or at least a phone that I could use. It only took me about 5 minutes of walking before I noticed a large SUV pulling up alongside me as I walked along the sidewalk. Sitting in the driver's seat was a slightly older guy who asked me if I needed any help. I responded by asking if I could use his phone, but sadly he claimed not to have one. Instead, he offered to give me a ride to a diner up the road that would let me use their phone, and against my better judgment, I hopped inside. We began making our way down the road, and at first, he was asking me normal questions like where I'm from, what I was doing in the area, and things of that sort. He even claimed to like 311, the band we went to see in concert, and all in all, he seemed like a pretty cool guy. That was until he started asking me about my personal belongings. It started off simple. He complimented the hoodie I was wearing, saying it looked nice, and asked me where I got it so he could pick one up. But then he said that it looked expensive. I started to become a bit uneasy at the comment, but tried to just brush it off. He then looked over at me and down at the watch that was on my wrist, which I tried to cover up with my sleeve, but it was too late. "That's a nice watch, too," he said to me before claiming that I probably had some money. I knew right away that I was in the wrong situation and asked the man if he could pull over and that I would walk the rest of the way, but he told me that he couldn't do that yet. When I asked him what he meant by yet, he proceeded to pull a small handgun out from the driver's side door and pointed it toward me. It was clear that I wasn't going to get out of the car without giving him whatever it was that he wanted. He continued to drive around slowly as I handed him my dead phone, my wallet, the watch, my sweatshirt, and my sneakers. He then shoved the gun in my face and told me that if I called the police, he was going to find me. I was sweating as I could see his finger resting on the trigger of the gun. I nodded in response to everything that he had said, and as soon as he pulled over, I jumped out of the car and began running in the opposite direction. I ran as fast as I could to the closest parking lot that had cars in it and ran inside asking for help. I explained that I had just gotten robbed, and the owner of the convenience store that I ran into called the police for me and then allowed me to call my girlfriend, who quickly came and picked me back up.